I fell in love with the Bram Stoker novel Dracula in my mid-teens. I'd known of Dracula prior to this, of course. Who didn't? There'd been a ton of movies made about him during the 20th century. One of the films I knew best was Nosferatu the Vampire, a 1979 horror film written and directed by Werner Herzog. My brother had an ex-video library copy of this on VHS, and he'd impress on me how it was basically this incredible remake of F.W. Murnau's 1922 Dracula adaptation, Nosferatu. I knew of that 1922 version because the Australian version of In Search Of, hosted by Leonard Nimoy, which was called Great Mysteries of the World down here, had footage from that film in its opening credits each week. And of course the legendary Christopher Lee made about 9 Dracula movies in total, 7 of them for the Hammer Horror series of films alone, so it was hard to miss those on late night TV on a semi-regular basis. And then Francis Ford Coppola directed Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1992, starring the likes of Gary Oldman, Keanu Reeves, Winona Ryder, and Anthony Hopkins. It was a Dracula for Generation X, and I was there for it. I saw it in the cinema, and I loved it. The films I've mentioned here, however, are just scratching the surface. Dracula movies, or at least movies based on Dracula, are a dime a dozen, as our American cousins might say. So how then did I have no knowledge of Dracula, a film that came out in the same year as Nosferatu the Vampire, 1979, and which recently appeared in a sale at my local JB Hi-Fi store? The answer seems to be that the film has enjoyed a very patchy life on home video since the early 80s, with some releases confined to the US only. So my best takeaway based on what I've read is that it was never really in front of me to notice in the first place. But finally, I've now watched it. Straight away, the credits were telling me that Frank, Skeletor to my generation, Langella, was in it. I mean, what? And Sir Laurence Olivier? What? Donald Pleasence? Blofeld from the Bond movies? What? Music by John Williams? What? I was genuinely intrigued. Soon after the opening of the film, however, it was clear it wasn't going to be a straight Bram Stoker adaptation. Yes, we were in Whitby, like in the novel, and yes, the Count's ship was coming in, like in the novel. But all of that happens much later in the novel, after the Jonathan Harker character has already been to Transylvania and met the Count at his home and become imprisoned and all sorts of stuff. Here, meanwhile, Harker comes tearing up the beach in his car. He's the legal representation for the Count and hasn't been to Transylvania at all, it seems. And wait a minute, what? Car? Yes, this film is set in what feels like the Edwardian period, rather than the pre-1900 Victorian period of the novel. And still there are more surprises to come. Lucy and Mina are present in the story, for example, but not as you know them. Lucy isn't Lucy Westenra, but Lucy Seward. That's right, she's now the daughter of Dr. Jack Seward, who in the novel is one of the 3 men wanting to marry her, so that's quite a change. And Mina is no longer Mina Murray, who marries Jonathan and becomes Mina Harker in the novel. She's now Mina Van Helsing, the daughter of Abraham Van Helsing, the guy who becomes instrumental in hunting Dracula. Also, it's Mina who is attacked and becomes undead early in the film version here, rather than Lucy, like in the novel, so there's a role reversal there as well. So, okay, these changes took a little adjustment, but made sense on some levels, such as Mina's fate really lighting a fire under Van Helsing to sort it all out. Some of the dialogue, meanwhile, felt a bit clunky, but with the film looking so lovely, it's totally gothic and has extensive location shooting, I could broadly stick with it. But then we get to the elephant in the room. Frank Langella's Dracula. I don't rate him, honestly. He gets around with blow-waved hair, looking like he's about to hit the dance floor in Saturday Night Fever. And look, I know this is the look of the era, but when everyone else is portrayed as Edwardian types, good old Frank, looking super duper 1970s, really takes me out of things. Even if I try to imagine he's looking different to be all exotic and strange and the reason why Lucy gets really into him, it still doesn't work for me. Oh, and before I go on, Doctor Who fans, the 7th Doctor, Sylvester McCoy, is in a few scenes in this film, but please don't buy it or even watch it for that alone. The scenes are tiny, and although he has a few lines, it's absolutely nothing of note. Miss Lucy! So, what we're left with is a movie of two halves. The film is really well shot. It feels super gothic. The location work is great, and even the interior sets are quite good on the whole. The John Williams score isn't Star Wars, but it's evocative perhaps of classic vampire films with the odd Williams flourish, if I can call it that. The acting is fine, and no one really tries to chew the scenery or steal the show. Indeed, some of the acting is quite understated, Olivier for example, so on all those points, I really didn't mind the film. Where I think it falls down is that it's not a full, true adaptation of the novel, so it loses a bit there. The swapping of roles for Mina and Lucy is also a bit odd, as are the new family situations they find themselves in. Frank Langella's Disco Dracula doesn't thrill me, as I've mentioned, and one final thing, Trevor Eve as Jonathan Harker doesn't feel quite right either. So there it is, my brief thoughts on the film. On some levels, there's quite a lot to sink your fangs into and enjoy with this one. Again, it looks really good, but at the same time, it doesn't hit the mark in some other areas. Anyway, what do you think? Have you seen this version of Dracula, or has it been hiding all these decades and been hard for you to find, like it was for me, especially among the tons and tons of other Dracula movies out there? Why not let me know your experiences with this film down below in the comments.